He was the velvet voice behind some of R&B's smoothest classics. But in the final pages of his life story, Walter Scott of the Whispers left more than just unforgettable music at the age of 81. His death rocked the industry, but no one anticipated the emotional collapse of his wife or the enormous fortune he had quietly set aside for his family. The newly surfaced details are truly unbelievable. Walter Scott wasn't merely a singer, he was a musical icon. As one of the soulful voices behind the Whispers, he helped define R&B's golden era, delivering eternal hits like Rock Steady and The Beat Goes On and Lady. With his velvety voice and gentlemanly stage charisma, he captured the hearts of millions. But now, that voice has been silenced. On June 26, 2025, Walter Scott passed away at 81, leaving behind not only a rich legacy in music, but a deeply emotional family narrative that's only now beginning to unfold. This isn't just a tribute to a legendary artist, it's a closer look at what his grieving wife revealed after his death, the hidden fortune he left behind, and the way his final days were spent preparing for his family, not basking in fame. These are revelations the public had never known, from private audio messages and handwritten letters to financial arrangements that even stunned his inner circle. In this video, we'll dive into it all. Walter's legendary rise with the Whispers, the private life he protected so fiercely, his wife's emotional confession after his passing, and the jaw-dropping inheritance he quietly prepared. You might think you know Walter Scott, but after this, you'll see the man behind the mic in a completely different light, long before he was known for his smooth tones and signature harmonies. Walter Scott was just a young man coming of age in Watts, Los Angeles, right in the middle of a cultural revolution and a musical awakening. Born in the early 1940s, Scott came of age during the rise of Motown, soul, and jazz. And even early on, he understood music wasn't just a hobby, it was his calling. In the 1960s, as America faced major shifts in identity and civil rights, Walter and his twin brother Wallace, Scotty Scott, joined forces with friends to form what would evolve into one of the most iconic R&B groups ever, the Whispers. Their beginnings weren't glamorous. They got their start performing at neighborhood talent shows, small clubs, and local community events around LA. But there was something magnetic about their harmony. And Walter? He was the group's not-so-secret weapon, smooth, soulful, and reliably steady. Even on early demos, producers pointed out how Walter's voice grounded the group's harmonies and carried the emotional depth of each track without ever overpowering the others. By the 1970s, the Whispers had signed with Soul Clock Records and later, Solo Records, producing a steady stream of soul and R&B hits. But what truly separated them from the rest wasn't just the music, it was their discipline and stagecraft. While other groups followed passing trends, the Whispers stood for consistency. Known for their tailored suits, flawless choreography, and perfectly fused harmonies. They were a nod to legends like the Four Tops and the Temptations, but with a fresh, modern edge all their own.
Walter, in particular, always stood out during their live shows. While he wasn't as outspoken as his twin brother, he brought a calm, magnetic energy to the stage that fans couldn't help but adore. He didn't need to be flashy or loud. His voice and subtle presence did all the talking. It was a rare kind of charisma that held audiences spellbound. Through the late 70s and early 80s, he became the group's quiet storm. The Whispers kept delivering hit after hit, and The Beat Goes On, Rock Steady, and The Mood, It's a Love Thing. These tracks weren't just popular, they became cultural milestones. They defined wedding receptions, backyard cookouts, roller rinks, and Saturday night soul radio. Their music became timeless, and although Walter's role often went underappreciated by the mainstream, his contributions were absolutely essential to the group's lasting power, even as musical trends shifted. The Whispers held firm, and a huge part of that was thanks to Walter Scott's steady influence. He wasn't chasing fame, he was preserving the sound. In many of his interviews, Walter emphasized how important it was to keep the group united like a family. That's part of the reason the Whispers stayed intact long after many other R&B acts had fallen apart. For them, it was about brotherhood, legacy, and uplifting one another, both on stage and off. But behind that poised stage presence, Walter was an intensely private man. Even in the height of the group's fame, he kept his family far away from the glare of the spotlight, almost to a fault. To the world, Walter Scott was a smooth frontman and a core member of one of R&B's most legendary groups. But to those who truly knew him, he was something different, a man of few words, deep loyalty, and quiet strength. Unlike many in the industry, Walter never ran toward fame. While his brother Scotty usually handled interviews and public appearances, Walter kept himself in the background not because he had nothing to say, but because he cherished the sanctity of his personal life. The attention and the cameras never compromised his values. He lived by purpose, by privacy, and with long-term planning always in mind. And now, in the wake of his death, the world is finally beginning to understand just what that planning looked like. Walter had been married to his wife for decades, and their bond, by every account, was rock solid. No public controversies, no tabloid drama, just two people who knew how to weather the highs and lows of fame without letting go of each other. Friends. Close to the couple described them as quietly powerful. The kind of pair who didn't need to say much. Their love spoke for itself. But beneath that quiet loyalty was something even more profound. Walter had been preparing for the inevitable without ever disturbing the peace of those he loved. As he aged and faced growing health concerns in his final years, Walter began carefully getting everything in order. He updated important documents. He had deeply emotional meetings with attorneys. He sorted and organized his personal records and left behind handwritten notes. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, it was purposeful. And his wife didn't fully realize the extent of what he had done until after he was gone. What she uncovered brought her to tears. In a heartfelt statement just days after Walter's death, his widow shared these words: "Walter didn't just leave us his music, he left us peace. He ensured everything was taken care of. He protected us. I could never have imagined just how much he had prepared." She described how he left behind letters, real, handwritten letters tucked away in specific drawers, slipped into hidden folders. Each one crafted for a moment he knew she'd face, filled with reassurance, financial guidance, and emotional strength. Instructions, comfort, and then came the emotional breakdown. Not just from the pain of loss, but from realizing that Walter had been quietly preparing her for this goodbye all along, without her ever catching on. That's the kind of love story that rarely makes headlines but truly deserves to. Behind almost every great artist stands someone holding the home together, sacrificing in silence, waiting in the background. And Walter never forgot that. He honored it, not just while he was alive, but even in death. His widow revealed that every debt had been paid off, trusts had been set up for the grandchildren, and he had even outlined specific donations to causes he believed in. And still, despite all this planning and love, Walter never once spoke publicly about his personal affairs. Not in interviews, not in documentaries, not even during the group's farewell performances. Why? Because Walter Scott wasn't the kind of man who needed applause for his acts of love. His family already understood the depth of what he gave them. But here's where fans were taken by complete surprise. Along with those deeply personal letters and the emotional legacy he left behind, Walter had also secured a hidden fortune, one so substantial it shocked even those closest to him. It wasn't just bank savings or music royalties, it included real estate, intellectual property, and surprise assets he had accumulated quietly over the years, all to make sure his wife and family didn't just survive after his death, they thrived. And here's the twist no one saw coming. The music industry had absolutely no idea just how smart Walter had been with his finances. Now, insiders are combing through royalty documents, licensing deals, and publishing contracts that are revealing a completely new dimension of the R&B legend. When fans think of musical icons, they imagine flashy award shows, platinum plaques, and arenas full of screaming fans. But very few stop to think about what happens once the spotlight dims. For Walter Scott, legacy meant far more than music. It meant security, stability, preservation, and now that he's gone, the world is starting to grasp just how far he went to ensure his family was protected. The fortune he left behind has fans, friends, and even longtime music executives completely speechless. So let's look at the numbers. According to sources close to the family, Walter had been working on his estate plan for years. Unlike many artists who got caught in bad contracts or reckless spending, Walter took another path. He made ownership his priority. That's right, Walter Scott quietly maintained partial ownership in the publishing and royalty rights of several of the Whisper's biggest hits. He also invested in real estate during the late 80s and early 90s, personal business ventures. Investment accounts, some left untouched for decades, were part of his portfolio. And here's the real shocker. Some of those properties are now worth millions due to gentrification and skyrocketing real estate values in the very California neighborhoods where he invested early. Public records show he owned property both in Los Angeles and in San Bernardino County, and these weren't mortgaged. These were bought outright with no debt. That kind of financial footing is rare among musicians from the 70s and 80s. In those days, record labels controlled everything from your masters to your touring revenue. Many artists were exploited, underpaid, and ended up with very little after the fame faded. But not Walter. Those close to him say he was always observant, always reserved, but very aware. He never showed off his wealth, but he paid close attention. And over time, he turned that attention into protection for the people he loved. One of the most shocking discoveries came in the form of his quiet battle for song ownership. According to a former Solar Records associate who chose to remain anonymous, Walter spent years fighting to ensure the Whispers. Not long after his passing, multiple tributes began taking shape. Bet is planning a Legends of Soul special where Walter and the Whispers will be honored alongside other iconic voices. A scholarship fund in Walter's name is also being developed, in collaboration with community colleges across California offering young Black musicians a real opportunity for professional music training. And get this, industry insiders say that a limited docuseries about the Whispers is already in the early stages of development, with streaming giants like Netflix and Hulu showing interest. And yes, Walter's story is set to be the emotional center of it all. It's ironic, the man who avoided the spotlight for most of his life is now becoming the focus of it after his death. But maybe that's exactly how he planned it. Not for fame, but for impact. Because what Walter gave the music world went far beyond just the records. His story after death is now pushing artists and fans alike to think differently, especially about financial literacy in the music business. His ability to hold on to rights and quietly build generational wealth is now being studied in industry discussions. His emotional planning, how he prepared his wife through heartfelt letters, thoughtful messages, and practical foresight is being talked about as a blueprint. And his ability to separate the private man from the public image, staying grounded, and never letting ego take over, is being celebrated more than ever. Music industry insiders are now calling his final years a quiet masterclass in artistic independence. He never needed a billboard to prove his worth. He wrote it in his will, in his royalties, and in his real estate holdings. And now, a new generation of musicians is asking themselves, am I protecting my future the way Walter did? And here's the real twist. Walter's wife just recently shared that before his health declined, he had begun working on one last personal project, a memoir. Although it wasn't finished, the family now plans to complete and release it using his handwritten letters, personal voice recordings, and the stories he left behind. She explained that he wanted the world to see the man behind the music, the man who struggled, who worked tirelessly, and who made sure his loved ones wouldn't have to struggle once he was gone. That's more than a memoir. That's a blueprint. Walter Scott's story proves that you don't have to be the loudest voice to be the strongest presence. He may not have chased headlines or stirred up controversy, but the choices he made on stage and behind the scenes continue to ripple through generations of musicians and families today. He didn't just sing about love, he lived it. He didn't chase fame, he followed purpose. And now, in the stillness following his passing, we're finally able to hear the full resonance of his legacy. Now it's your turn. What has the Whispers music meant to you personally? Were you surprised to hear about Walter's hidden fortune? Do you think more artists should follow his example and prepare for the future like he did? Let's celebrate his life in the comments. Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear about a real legend. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of the icons who shaped our culture.